work session of the Portland City Council, and today's date is October 26th. We're going to hear
recording in progress.
City's African American Network, and with that, we'll turn it over to them. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Mayor. I think we're waiting for one more. Let's see. We're waiting for Taisha to get in. So if we can all just be patient for a couple moments here while she gets into the Zoom call, that would be great.
Yes, Mayor, if I may, while we're waiting for our next speaker, I'd like to introduce why we're having this conversation today.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. First, let me say thank you to the city's African American Network. Thank you for your tireless efforts and actually providing data-driven research to make sure that the city understands whether we are living up to our promise as a workplace of choice, especially as it relates to the African American workforce here. I want to personally thank you because in my short time here at City Hall, in my 3 years, you have presented us with 2 very detailed reports that I know you did as volunteers on your own time, on your own dime, and you presented it to leadership here at the City of Portland. I asked us to schedule this work session because I thought it was important that you, as the city's African American Network, had the opportunity to present your own research to your own elected leaders here at the City of Portland. So I appreciate you taking the time. And let me tell you, I know many of you are out of your comfort zone today, but this is your time. This is your time to share your truth, your research. And I want you to know that I am grateful that both for your time, your energy, and your commitment to make the City of Portland a workplace that is welcoming and embraces our African American employees. And so I just want you to know I honor what you present today, and I am very grateful that you are courageous enough to share your truth with us today. So thank you for being here. And hopefully I've talked long enough that everybody's here and we can just jump in.
All right, thank you for those kind words, Commissioner Hardesty. My vision here on the screen looks like people are glitching, so I'm just gonna take off my video so that way if I sound robotic or glitchy, maybe that will resolve that. And I will fill in here until
and if you could ask everyone else to put their mic on mute if they're not speaking, that will also help with the sound quality. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will go ahead and just fill in here until Taisha can get on and go ahead and start us off with the work session. So can I just get a quick thumbs up that everybody can hear me? Good. Let's see, Commissioner Match, yes. Commissioner Hardesty.
Would you like me to share the presentation while you're going?
I don't know, did the city person have the presentation available, or is it better that we share our screen?
We have it up, we can share it.
Okay, if you can pull that up, please. Outstanding. Okay, great. All right, well, here we go. CAN work session presented by your CAN leadership team. I am Marvin Dean. On the CAN leadership team with me is Ira Bailey, Taisha McCool-Riley, Jarrell Hosley, Layla Hale, and Ariel Bradford. We make up the CAN leadership team. I guess I should also make sure that I give everybody's pronouns so that when they're speaking, they can be addressed correctly. Ira is he, his, Ariel, she, her, myself, he, his, Layla, they, them, Jarrell, he, his, and Taisha, she, her, just so to make sure that everybody gets spoken to correctly. So the City African American Network which is CAN, seeks to build a common bond of fellowship among Black employees who honorably serve the city of Portland. CAN is made up of city staff who volunteer their time in addition to their roles at the city, utilizing our voices to advocate for systemic changes. CAN advocates for fair employment, inclusive policies and practices, and equal promotional opportunities for Black employees through positive relationships with city and community leaders who value and embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion beyond just awareness. While citywide racial equity goals have been reiterated in the last few years, the workforce demographics do not reflect a priority or outcomes for racial equity. CAN
Excuse me
promotes.
for a second, Marvin. Should the slides be moving?
No,
Okay, I just wanted to check. Sorry.
no, you're good. Thank you. CAN promotes the message of the city not only adopting new core values, but that the system be challenged and modified to enact a culture shift that centers the experience and well-being of Black staff. We are an affinity group who recognized a common theme among ourselves and decided to summon the voices of other Black city staff who also shared our sentiments. As an affinity group, we are here to speak to a human crisis. Black city employees have a unique experience that often is riddled with lack of trust, discrimination, oppression, silencing, invalidation, over-supervising, et cetera, et cetera. CAN's objective is to advocate for the Black voices within the city who oftentimes do not have a voice and to speak to the systemic changes that are necessary to improve the experience of Black employees at the city of Portland. In doing so as volunteers, we put ourselves on the line. We work tirelessly, often exposing ourselves to burnout due to mental and emotional toll and the demands of the work as many Black employees express an appreciation for the work and desire to be a part. To be part there is still a large gap in those willing to engage in this work. Given the impression that the system as it continues to perpetuate fear, anxiousness, and suffering in silence. So I'll just take a moment if you guys have any questions thus far or want to make comments about anything I just shared. Are we good? All right, next slide, please. So a quick agenda, the overview of CAN, the CAN work to date. Hopefully we'll have some testimonies. We had a couple of people that we reached out to that were prior employees of the city who we hope are going to be able to join. There were some conflicting schedules, so that may or may not happen to go over the CAN budget. Hopefully Taisha will be able to join us to go over the mental health piece, recommendations and next steps. Next slide, please. CAN's why. What is our why? This can be collective or individually shared. As you see here, we want to make sure that we advocate for African-American employees. As I stated initially, that we just want to make sure that we have fair employment, workplace treatment, equitable promotional opportunities, and mental health needs that are make sure that those are met for all Black employees. We want to elevate the disparities and representation gaps for African-American employees. We want to promote a person-centered workforce. We want to make sure that we're working to implement systemic change work that will examine the city's fundamental systemic policies and practices to address and eradicate anti-Black behaviors and practices. We want to engage with council to create and implement policy procedural changes that align with recommendations listed within the Black Workforce Report. Shout outs. We want to make sure that we give Commissioner Hardesty a shout out because she definitely met with us and helped get this a session in place for the good and the bad, because we definitely have never undertaken anything like this. We are volunteers, true and true, but I think hopefully we're going to be able to set a precedence for all affinity groups going forward to have these interactions with the commissioners and mayors to make sure that we're not just speaking for the Black experience, as CAN, but we're opening a door and opportunity for affinity groups to speak for their groups as well, so that everyone can have a voice. We're looking forward for this time together. We also want to make sure that we thank everyone, the mayor included, for the times that we had to speak with you all and prioritizing the opportunities to meet with us and to listen to our concerns and recommendations. Next slide, please. So CAN Productions up to this point. As stated earlier, we put out 2 surveys, one in 2020, the initial survey to collect the data for the Black Workforce Report. And then we did a follow-up one this year, which we amended and made some changes once we saw the mandates coming out, first around the face mask, and then the second one with the vaccine. And we collected some data around that and see how that was going to affect our community as well. We put on events every month. We do an Always Eat Together the first Tuesday of every month. We do Black History Month every year, and we also do Juneteenth. We have written letters to all the directors. I think we met with the majority of the directors. If somebody has that number offhand, maybe you can share that. But I want to say off the top of my head, we met with about 21 or 23 directors. Somebody else in CAN want to chime in and help me with that number?
I don't have those numbers off top, but I know that I met with at least 4 different directors. So we've been splitting up the work, meeting with as many people who will make the time to meet with us.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Layla. And then we also did a few meetings with BHR. I know there was some confusion early on about the work session, who was going to go first and what that interaction looked like with BHR and all of that stuff. So there was some confusion there, but I'm thinking most of it is getting worked out. So at this point, I just want to pause because I feel like I'm speaking at everyone and I rather have a dialogue. So if I can just take a break from speaking and maybe get some questions or input from others at this point.
Mayor, if I may, this is a work session, so I can just jump in.
Jump in, folks, if you've got a question, and if you want me to moderate it, I'm happy to do that, but otherwise just feel free to jump in.
All right, Marvin, I'm curious as to what the different questions were from the 2020 survey. What were the new questions that you asked in 2021? And were there any stark differences in the data that you received in those 2 years?
Oh yeah, we definitely asked some different questions, and I will say we definitely more than doubled our responses. We almost 3 times the number of participants and data that we got this time around. So I think the outreach, number one, was important because we didn't have the ability to reach out to all Black employees. And I feel at this point that we still don't, because I've been in different groups where I've asked people if they've even seen the workforce report, number one. Number two, if they were getting invites to our Always Eat Togethers and things of that nature. And people didn't know about it. One, they don't get those invites. So there's still a disconnect somewhere with us having the ability to interact with all the Black employees in the city.
So Marvin, I'm hoping that's one of the questions that we can get answered from this work session, because I have personally asked for a list of Black employees so that I could actually invite them to participate in CAN. And I also get a runaround as to why that is not something that I should have access to. And so I have that on my list as a question when we invite human resources to come and respond. Because it should not be that difficult for an organization set up to support Black employees for Black employees to be able to communicate with each other. So I see all my colleagues' hands are up, and so I'm gonna.
Yes.
I will let them weigh in, and I'll come back later with some
Okay.
additional questions.
Really quick, I do want to comment on that, Commissioner Hardesty, because I think this is a theme that has come up often around this data. And initially, even from us putting together the workforce report, the idea of the data and how we had pushback around the data. And we're only reporting on data that was available to us. And at this point, it still seems as data is elusive for everyone across the board. And I don't understand how we can't provide up-to-date lifetime data, because I'm curious to know how, right now, how the mandate is going to affect the number of employees and how that's going to affect the number of people of color. Like how many people left, how many people are still here. Like we should be able to have that data available if we look on the dashboard to say, all right, this number of people were affected by this. And how come we only have data as recent as January of this year? Like, I think that's egregious there.
Thank you, Marvin. That gives you and I something to follow up on, and the rest of my colleagues, because I agree with you. I think sharing this kind of information with city employees makes sense if our goal is to actually provide support for affinity groups to be able to meet and share information. So shouldn't be that difficult. So we will figure out after this work session why that continues to be a challenge. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Ryan, I think I saw next.
Yeah, good morning, Marvin, Dean. Thank you for getting us started. Thank you for your leadership and to all of the members from CAN that are here this morning. My hand went up actually to want to understand the distinction between the 2020 and 21 questions, and Commissioner Hardesty asked that question. However, I still want to, and this was very interesting to listen to the dialogue about the challenge to just get the basic information so you can steward your fellow African-American employees of the city. And I'm glad that that came out so soon in our work session. I do have a question. Of those African-American employees that you have information on, what percentage would you say participated in the surveys? Just curious.
I would say a little bit less than 25%. So based on the last workforce report that we had in 2021, we had roughly 450 Black staff, or staff who are identified as Black, reported. We had 103 responses for the 2021 survey.
Thank you, Ira. I appreciate that. And my knowledge on survey responses is actually that's a high response rate. I think a lot of people wouldn't think that when you hear a number like that 25%. However, it was just interesting, the dialogue earlier about the challenge of even getting that data to you. So, but anyway, I'm happy to hear that there was a decent participation rate. Thanks.
Really quick, I just want to add one thing as well, Commissioner Ryan, that
Sure.
we are CAN, City African American Network, but I want to make sure that you understand we're speaking for all Black employees, not just African American employees.
Okay. Wait, do that again. Sorry, I don't know why.
We're speaking for all Black employees, not just African American. Are you good? All right, cool. And then I see my colleague has joined us, Taisha. So Commissioner Rubio has her hand up as well. So she can take over on some of this stuff as well. So thank you, Taisha, for making it.
Thank you. I'm glad I finally got in. Go ahead, Commissioner, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Marvin, Taisha, and everyone. A lot of my questions were asked by my colleagues, but so one of the remaining questions I have is about, this is a significant, when I look at this list, it's a significant amount of work. Can you talk a little bit about how the CAN group operates and how many in your work group to get this amount of work done? How much of your day do you have space in your day to work on this during the workday, and how much did you have to put in outside of work to get this amount of work done? And how is the city supporting, and how has that changed over time? Sorry, that's a lot in one question, but would love to hear, and if there's been any movement in that kind of support over time.
So we will get deeper in depth around a lot of the questions that you asked. There was a lot there. The first piece was like, how did we get to this point? And if we know historically, affinity groups within the city of Portland, they usually are coming together and kind of trying to just, they're coming together to discuss what's happening, what's going on, how they can improve the experience. But for CAN, as often as we do as Black people, it's like, hey, we take this personal, like this is impacting us. And so we positioned ourselves to say, hey, we want to do more than just come together monthly and have lunch together and discuss, hey, this is what's happening in the workplace. This is what I'd like to see change. We were thinking along the lines of, no, we want to actually really push forward that change. We want to be change agents within the city. And so what we did is we came together and was like, what is our real true objective, right? Like, yes, we want to give voice to city employees, but also we want to actually be collaborating, co-creating to actually create space to where the Black employee experience is improved overall, right? So as we talked about some of the things we'll discuss around retention, promotion, recruiting, just the overall experience. And so what happened is we were kind of in the works of like, okay, how do we make this thing happen? And then boom, COVID hit, right? And so when COVID hit, we were all starting to notice within ourselves, like, hey, there's some things that don't feel so good for us. We wonder what the experience of other employees are. And so we said, okay, well, let's do a survey. And honestly, we were just going to do the survey to, get some feedback. So we do the survey in 2020. And that survey was really around like, are people feeling supported? Acknowledging that at a time where people had to isolate and people were fearful and all of these things, like people's mental wellness was impacted. And so we said, okay, we want to include some questions around how are people tending to their mental wellness? Do they feel safe to do so? And like that employee leadership connection. So when we received the data back, it was like, oh, this is more than what we thought we were going to get. And there were some common themes. And from that, we were like, okay, we can't just sit with this information. Let's push something forward from it. And so with that, we came up with our recommendations, and then we began to connect with bureau directors. And from connecting with bureau directors, we received information, and then that kind of trickled into us connecting with council, you all individually and some collectively. And then that kind of progressed the work. And so once we already got the work started, it was like, we can't let 2021 go by without actually connecting with staff yet again to see, hey, are there any changes? Are there still some common themes? So that question around the difference between the questions, there were a few questions that were different. We added questions where people were actually able to just like, hey, this is my anonymous quote, or this is my anonymous story. But for the most part, it was around support, right? So that's the survey. And so that kind of has evolved. And so we are now speaking to capacity. Right now we have, I think, is it 6 of us on leadership? We started out with it started off at about 6, we went up to 8, and then we shrunk back down to about 6. And so we do this work on top of our roles within the city. And we are volunteers. And so we come forward and we put in tireless hours and time, just thinking about the preparation it took to prepare for today. We were working through the weekend, through the wee hours of the night and morning, just to make sure that we showed up, and that when we showed up able to answer questions that provide adequate information for all of you. But this work is deep, right? If you all were to hire a consultant to come in and to do the work that we're doing, the city would be paying out thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars for someone to come in and say, hey, these are the things that need to happen, or this is our assessment, this is our diagnosis for the city, this is our treatment plan, this is what needs to happen. But you all have an affinity group in-house that is saying, this is important to us because it is about us, it is impacting us. this is what we live every day as people, as human beings. This is our experience. And so we take it personal. And so because it's so personal to us, we are trying to push the work forward, but we are running up against some brick walls. We talked about data, right? We are running against the brick wall that people are not in the know about who CAN is, how they can access us. Brick walls and a lack of communication and transparency. People hijacking the work, people showing up as if they have been doing the work that we're doing. A lot of folks didn't come forward to acknowledge the work that was being done until we released a Black Workforce Report, right? So there's all these different dynamics that are happening behind closed doors that most people may not be privy to, but even still, CAN is still showing up and saying, hey, we want to see the change. And why do we want to see the change? Because our experience matters, right? And so when we're showing up in these roles and saying, hey, I work for the city of Portland, we're saying also, like, even though I work for the city of Portland, my experience is important. That experience of my colleague is important. And so that is ultimately why we do the work. But if you look at this, we do a lot. We put on events. And everything that we do, it makes the city of Portland look very good. I will say that I am honest, I am upfront. The things that we push out, Black History Month, we write the proclamations, we organize how the testimonies will go. Juneteenth, we organize events, who's gonna come in, who's gonna speak, what we want the impact to be. Always Eat Together, we are strategic with that. We even connected and partnered with Dr. Markeisha on the Black Spaces multiple times. We are really saying there's work to be done and we're willing to do the work, but we cannot do the work by ourselves. We need the buy-in, we need the commitment. We need folks that's saying, hey, we want to come in and we want to make this a co-collaborative, a co-creation thing where we're all sharing the work, we're all sharing the duties, we're all sharing the responsibilities, and it cannot just fall on CAN and solely on CAN, as we are not paid to do this work. We do this work because it matters to us, because it's about us. I just gave you all a whole lot, so I'm going to pause. Are there any questions?
That more than answered my question. Thank you so much.
I want to thank CAN for being here today and for the presentation so far. One of the things I'm really eager to learn more about today are the results and findings and lessons from your last two surveys. Can we hear a little bit more about what you found and what you think the appropriate follow-ups would be?
We're going to get to that very soon. And if you can hold on just a moment, we're going to make sure we get to that. There's a specific part of the presentation where we dive deeper into the depths of the survey, what came of it, and what our plans are going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other questions.
Well, I want to pop in and just ask one more question. You talked about the events that you do as CAN. Would you elaborate a bit on what you're asked to do by various bureaus and even the city council that actually is really outside of CAN's work plan?
So there's the financial piece where it's like, we're not even necessarily asked. It's like, okay, this is important to us. We see other things that are put on for other groups, and there's some type of buy-in from the city. The city's taking some type of.
Excuse me, Taisha, you're having some internet problems. You're coming in and out. Maybe if you turn your video off, your sound might improve.
Okay. Does it sound better now?
It does. Thank you.
Awesome sauce. So what I was saying is that what we have had to do is we had to go to financially, we have had to say, hey, let's go around and let's say, hey, if Black history is really important to you, how about you contribute to the funding so that when we have folks to come in and do our events from community and they share their talents with us for Black History Month, we need to be able to adequately compensate them for their time, for them sharing space with us. Then there's that piece of, we want you all to plan, we want you to execute. So that means we are, like I said, we're writing the proclamations, we are organizing all of the events, we are then saying, hey, this is what we're doing, and show up. And then when we show up, the city gets the praise and the accolades. We are asked to, like I said, you create the budgets, and my team can chime in as well. We are just really asked to take on the responsibility of, hey, you gather and you do the things that make the Black employees feel supported, or makes it look good as if we're supporting the Blacks that work for the Black employees that work for the city of Portland. And if we're honest, like, all of this work is beyond beyond us, right? All of this is outside of our scope. But as we took the initiative and we said we want to be proactive and we want to do the things that matter to our community, we have yet to receive the support we need from the city to say, hey, not only is this important to you all and you all are taking it on, but this is important to us and we want to know how we can connect with you. The first conversations we've had about connecting on our events thus far has been this year. And we've been doing it for several years now. And we put a lot of time, energy. We gather committees from other bureaus, and we're saying, hey, let's come together. And what we're finding, honestly, is that people are a little skeptical about joining into the work because they're not sure about what the buy-in is from their supervisors, from their managers. They don't feel safe and comfortable or supported to be able to engage with CAN. And that's another thing that we haven't spoken about, is that there is this underlying fear and worry about, hey, if I engage with CAN, does that put me on a chopping block? Is my supervisor or manager going to support that? How do I do that on top of the work that I'm already doing? So that's yet another barrier that we face when we talk about capacity, and the fact that, hey, there are 6 of us who do this work.
Thank you very much for that. And I know you're going to get into a lot of this in the presentation. And so we have an hour and a half left. And I think you have such rich information. Maybe we should just go through the presentation and then open it up for a deeper conversation.
That works for me, whatever works for you all.
I just don't want us to miss the work that you've put into this presentation, because we could talk. I have so many questions that I unfortunately already know the answer to. So I just want to be respectful of the work you've put into the presentation. I think it makes sense for us to go through the presentation and then get into a deeper conversation. Actually, the mayor's hand is up as well.
Yeah, I want to concur with Commissioner Hardesty. And the reason I'm sort of sitting on my hands here is I know that you've got a meaty presentation here, and I really want to hear it. So I didn't want to be pushy, but I just, for the record, I do concur with Commissioner Hardesty. I'd like to hear the whole presentation and then get to questions and answers, because I suspect you're going to answer a lot of our questions through your presentation.
That is what we planned ahead for. We tend to have a perspective of coming with the information that we know you all need, and the information we've been dying for you all to actually hear and to respond to and kind of just, deal with in the space together with us. So yes, if you all are ready for us to just go ahead and flow through the presentation, I am going to pass it over to Ira. On the next slide, stories of the 2021 survey, and Ira will take us away.
Good morning, Commissioners, Mayor. I want to first say thanks for recognizing that this is kind of a new experience for both sides. For us as being a part of this work session, and then as commissioners sitting in with normal staff who are volunteering their time on this project. And so one of the questions that was asked earlier is like, what are the differences between the 2020 survey and the 2021 survey? There's not much difference in our intent. We wanted to know, did Black staff feel supported in what was going on in the transitions that were happening? Interestingly enough, as we were talking, I realized Black staff or Black people in Portland kind of have this history of displacement, being used to one situation and scenario, and then due to circumstances outside of their control, being asked or forced to move outside of that. And that transition happened in 2020 when all of the city offices closed, and we were asking, did people feel supported in being able to work from home? Did they have the technology that they needed? Were the supervisors understanding of any extra support that they were needing? And were they able to get that? And so that was our intent behind 2020. And then that's when we got those results, which were a mixed bag. A few people felt they were okay, but most people felt that they didn't have the support that they needed. And then there was evidence of high stress, which kind of catapulted us into more of this work, as Taisha has already mentioned. And then in 2021, we then had the conversations of getting back to the office. Okay, COVID is going to wrap up, is what they said, right? And we're going to have to learn how to transition going back into the office. And by that time, however, people were starting to get used to working from home. And although it's been our employer's intent to get us back into the office, it's not necessarily the community's support system that would allow that. So we've heard from parents who are concerned about childcare. Transportation is getting crazy again. So, and just the uncertainty of what is it going to be like in the office environment. And then you layer that with the vaccine mandate and how quickly that transformed, and how politicized that has been. And it makes for a mess. And so we wanted to know what Black staff felt like that. And so the questions that we asked about 8 questions, or about 10 questions. And they were, 2 of them were basic. Do you identify as Black? And that was important to us because after the workforce report, we got a lot of feedback that we didn't include some of the categories that BHR recorded as including Black. Because some folks answered 2 or more races, and that didn't come across necessarily in our workforce report. And so that was 2 of the questions. And then the other question was, do you feel like your supervisor or leader empowers you to tend to your mental health? Do you feel safe to disclose when you're experiencing mental distress? Do you feel like you receive the support necessary to be successful in your role from your supervisor or leadership? Do you feel tokenized in your role? Do you feel comfortable to share or air your grievances? And if so, do you know the process to be able to do that? And again, the survey included 103 responses. And as far as folks who felt like they were able to care for their mental health, which is very important, we had 71 out of 103, so about 70%. Do you feel safe to disclose when you're having mental distress? That dropped to 47. So although people said they feel secure that their supervisor or leader empowers them to tend to their mental health, they still don't feel comfortable doing so. And that could be due to a variety of factors or reasoning that has nothing to do with their direct supervisor or manager. Do you feel like you receive support to be successful? That was 63, which is better than 50%, but still fairly low. And 24 of those 63 people were the ones that didn't feel comfortable. And then we had, do you feel tokenized? 49%. Do you feel comfortable sharing your grievances? That's 53%. And do you know the process to file complaints or seek assistance and being able to do that? That's 51%. So the consideration that stands out to me is if this survey were a report card that was grading Black people's experience within the city of Portland, not only is it one that we could stand behind because it's 25%, and a lot of surveys that are done do not measure that number or that large of a sample size. It's 25%. But when you look at the comparisons, this would give the city of Portland a fail. It would be D's, maybe one C, but mostly fails if this were a report card. And so our intent is to get the support of the commissioners, to get the support of the directors, to be able to turn those numbers around. And then also, as you can see in the presentation, we wanted to include some of the folks' response in their own words. And so these are anonymous quotes that were given to us that I wanted to share. And the reason why I selected these 4 is because they were more on the moderate side. And so one was, I feel like I'm being harassed. And that's a common thing. There are Black staff who feel like they are simply being harassed because they're Black. They're getting extra pressure. There's one that says the city preaches about anti-racism, but when it comes to doing something about it, they do nothing. And so that's people's fair experience. But on the flip side, there were people who felt like simply being Black and the fact that we're doing this work makes them feel like a victim. So as you can see, don't constantly paint me as a victim. I'm not. And as we've mentioned over and over again, we're not a monolith as CAN leadership. We speak as one voice, but not for one voice, if that makes sense. Right. And then other people felt horrible. They're looking for a new job. And again, the responses in their own words went everything from a recommendation to conservative reading from author Candace Owens to the city's mandate feels like slavery. I wish I could say that I was making that up, but that was actually people's responses and feelings. Most of their feelings had to do with pay, the vaccine mandate, returning to the buildings, work culture itself, and then leadership. Those are the major themes that came up in the individual responses. So kind of as a summary, that's really what it is. I will say that I did do a cross-reference of who felt secure, who felt optimistic about change, who felt supported, and roughly about 8 people out of the 103 felt content in their role or that they could grow, felt optimistic about the city's efforts to improve employee experience and felt supported. So that kind of tells you where we're at as far as Black staff go.
I'm sorry, Ira, did you say 8 people out of the 103 felt secure in the position they're in and positive about? Wow.
Yeah. So for other than yes or no questions, other questions we asked were as far as like, what do you feel is your best perspective regarding your role in the city? 18 people said they were content in their role. 21 people said they're leaving and they're looking for other experience or other employment. 19 people said they did not feel empowered or that they did not feel empowered to pursue leadership within the city. And then 45 people said that there's room for growth. And then the other question we asked is, how would you rate your overall satisfaction with your experience as a city employee? 40 people said they were unsatisfied. 53 said they were satisfied. And 10 said that the experience exceeded their expectations. And then the last question we asked was, how do you feel about equity and inclusion efforts improving your experience as an employee? 32 said they felt optimistic. 25 were neutral and 46 were pessimistic. So when I did that intersection of who was content, who was satisfied, who was optimistic, who felt supported, it came out to a total of about 8 people.
Can I chime in really quick? This is Taisha. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to kind of circle back to a couple points that were made earlier on when Ira was sharing about the folks who identified as having that experience where they feel like they knew what was going on with them and like they could. And then that piece of there was no follow through with actually connecting with the supervisor or leadership to access resources and information or whatever the case may be. there's a lot of stories, like this says, the slide says, stories of 2021. There's a lot of stories to be told, right? Life didn't stop when COVID showed up on the scene. And so people are literally doing the juggling act. They're juggling home, they're juggling professional, they're juggling family, they're juggling loss and grief, mental health disabilities. And so people are doing typically the Black experiences, the suffering and silence, where whatever I'm dealing with stays with me. I don't share it with anyone because I don't trust that when I share it with anyone, that they are going to hear me, that they are going to believe me, that they can validate me, that I will feel like I'm heard, that I will feel like I'm seen. And so what would actually be the point of me coming forth with my true story? And so oftentimes what we see is when people show up into the workplace, a lot of folks are suffering in silence. And so if I had to title this story, I would title it The Story of Deception. Why? Because if you look at the numbers on the surface, some of those numbers look like, oh, okay, we might kind of be okay. But then when we heard Ira just kind of disaggregate and break that data down, the reality is that Black employees are not feeling supported. They're not feeling like they have the ability to actually access support and resources that they need to feel like they want to stay in their job, like they want to move up within the city, that they feel like this is the place for them. And if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belonging is high on that spectrum. We want to belong. Human beings have a sense of wanting to belong. And a lot of Black employees, the reality is they don't feel like they belong. And so they're willing to find employment elsewhere because this doesn't feel like a place where they quite fit in. And that is the reality for Black people just in our country, period, or in nations, period, is that sense of we don't feel like we belong. And we don't feel like we belong. We don't have trust. We don't have confidence. We don't have faith, and we become hopeless that, hey, this system is going to change. And so when we're thinking about this is about the system, folks. The system that is continuously failing Black people and also brown people, right? But today we're specifically talking about the Black employee experience. And so if I could push anything forward, it's like leaders are not equipped, they're not feeling equipped. The city is not appropriately equipping them with what they need to be able to respond to folks when they're experiencing mental health distress. We have to do better at saying, hey, this is our priority, and actually matching our words with our behaviors and our actions. And so I just wanted to emphasize that there's a story that is underlying here, right? And everyone has that story. And when we are hearing these numbers, it is telling us something. The question is, are we willing to listen and actually respond? We can no longer just sit and say, hey, we have this information. We actually have to dig in and get our hands dirty and get the mud up to our elbows, so to speak, on really challenging the system and changing the system so that we are supporting and inclusive of all people, including that Black employee experience. And Ira, I don't know if you want to chime in if you were done, and then we can move to the next slide.
No, but on that, I do want to say that one of the things like that the city needs to be aware of is that there's an assumption that I've heard when we were discussing things with BHR, and that is that some Black staff left because they were unhappy, but some Black staff left to move on to bigger and better things. And the assumption there is that if they left to move on to bigger and better things, that they didn't have a horrible experience at the city, and that being the sole reason why they were looking for bigger and better things. And that's not necessarily the case, which is why we wanted to have some of the previous employees and hear from them, because there is this window of time where folks are experiencing things that they may not feel comfortable in addressing. And that's because they don't want it to affect their potential application to another position. And so they get really quiet during that time of transition. But once they're in their new position and secure, they have the freedom to express what their previous experiences was. So we hope to be able to get some of that information to you in the future, and also to work with BHR, or at least further encourage them to do exit surveys or to be more diligent on that, so we can know why people were leaving and know what their experience was before they left. But with that being said, are there any questions on about the survey? I know there was some before we got to it, but Are there any at this time?
I'm not sure if I already have this somewhere in my files, but I'd love to actually get a hard or a digital copy of the original survey. It's probably, if you've sent it over already and I haven't seen it lately, I apologize, but if we can get a new copy, that would be very helpful to me.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
All right, next slide, please. Right. And so the workforce data report, this is something that was presented back in March. So I'm just going to kind of give a quick summary of it again. The number of Black employees was pointed out, went from 793, and at that time it was 7.65% of the workforce. Since 2019, yes, the entire city of Portland has lost staff. Black employees went from 793 to 456, but our percentage of the workforce also decreased from 7.65 to 6.7. So you can see by that number that it disproportionately impacted Black staff when jobs were lost. We also found in the workforce report that most of the Black staff are employed in either service positions or admin support positions. The bureaus with the largest number of Black staff is Parks and Rec, followed by Transportation. The bureau with the highest percentage of Black staff is the Bureau of Equity and Human Rights. We found that in 2020, Black employees represented 36.5% of the seasonal staff in parks. And then when we look at the information based on gender, 63% of Black staff identify as male. So those were just kind of some high-level review of the workforce data report. Are there any questions on that? Okay, so thank you for your time. Next, I think we go back to Marvin.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hold my questions, Ara, until you're done. I do have specific questions, but I'll wait until the presentation's done.
Okay, sounds good.
And thanks for the time check there, Commissioner. I can't believe how fast the time goes by. Like, this is crazy. Like, you look at the time like, wow, how are we gonna fill this much time? But wow, the time is flying. So I guess it's a good and a bad that our guests have not showed at this point in time. So we will go ahead and skip to the next slide. But before we go to the next slide, I just want to make sure that I do inform you all that we have a lot of responses on there that at some point in time, I feel we need to share those stories that Taisha was speaking about, because this time around, we had a lot of people who took the time out to share their experiences and how they were feeling. So I don't want that to be missed. And I would hate for that information just to reside with us and not go anywhere else, because then that's adding to the point of people's voices not being heard and that they're feeling like they're speaking into oblivion. Like, why share this when it's going nowhere? So I do want to make sure that, we follow up and share those people's concerns and their stories as well.
And Marvin, can I chime in super quick?
Yeah,
I just wanted to say that I imagine that people are responding, that we receive more responses because folks are like, hey, not only are they asking for our voice, they're actually engaging with us, and they're going to actually be responsive, and they're actually going to do something to really lift up that work and to try to improve what the Black experience is. So I imagine that the increase has to do with the buy-in, like, hey, not only do they hear us, but they're saying that these are the steps that they're going to take, and we're actually witnessing that these are the things that they're going to do. And so for that reason, I feel like it's worth me actually sharing my story. So when people begin to see the work and feel the work, we will begin to see a shift in the culture around people feeling like they actually can engage and share of themselves.
Correct. Thank you, Taisha. Next slide, please. All right, budgetary considerations. So we so graciously received $50,000 this year to do some of the work that we're doing. I will say that we received that money without necessarily knowing what to do with the money or how the money was going to be allocated or uh-oh, am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay,
Sound good.
Okay, cool. Everybody froze on my screen, so that's why I was like, oh no. All right, so we got those funds, and I want to say we got a time code to use for billing somewhere near the end of July, maybe the beginning of August. So we weren't able to access those funds like right away to do with. So going for, all right, that was weird. So going forward with the funds, we plan on doing the following here. We have Black History Month. That is going to be the next thing coming up for us. We're planning on spending about $8,000 there. After that, we have Juneteenth, which we plan on spending about $4,000 on. We have in the past done a Black Family Resource Fair, and we're hoping to do that again as well and spend $10,000 on that. And then the big consideration was our time and how we allocate our hours to do this volunteer work. And initially, affinity groups, I believe, were given an hour. And if you're in leadership, you're given 3 hours of paid time to do this. So we did a calculation to figure out how much time for us to dedicate to doing this as volunteers in addition to those. And the rest of that money would be going towards those hours as volunteer work, which equates to about $22,000 for the year for the 6 of us that's on there. And then the money that doesn't get spent, because again, I'm not all the way familiar with the process, and we're not all the way familiar with the process on budgets and how the money works and fall bump and the other bump, things of that nature. We're like inquiring to see how those funds can be possibly carried over to the next budget, or if there's an opportunity to create some type of trust fund or something to put the funds in, so that if we're not using all that money up, that money doesn't just go away, so that if we're no longer around, somebody else can carry this going forward and have the budget to do this. As well as, I guess in this point, I would like to just throw out there, and maybe we'll cover this later, the opportunity to have a person to work with, whether it be through DEEP or whether it be from someone's office, because we have had the opportunity to interact with a couple of people from the different commissioners' offices that provided invaluable help around this planning session. And I just would want to put out there that for any affinity group going forward, or anybody in this position, to have somebody that can counsel them on how to go about doing a presentation, where to use funds and how to use those funds and how to ask for those funds, that we make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen going forward. Like, we're the test here, but we want to make sure that, you know, going forward, that the precedent is set, that nobody else has to go through this. I see a couple of hands there.
So Marvin, I want to jump in because the reason I asked for the council to support a $50,000 allotment to DEEP last year was because of all the work that you do for free. And I just wanted to make sure that you had the resources to continue to do the work that you are being asked to do. When you talk about whether it's Juneteenth or Black History Month or whatever events that DEEP manages, you have done it for free for as long as you have existed. And it just seemed crazy to me that there was this expectation that somehow you would just take on this additional burden. I don't believe that allotment was an ongoing, I don't remember. But I'm totally committed to making sure that those dollars are are asked for again, so that you can continue the work that you're doing. So I'm happy to have Kristen in my office work with you about how to ask for that carryover. But trust me, you don't have to have that conversation here today. It's really about the work that you've already done. So I just wanted to let you know. Don't worry about that. We are all learning this process. Well, I know it a little bit. I've been here a couple of years working on it, but you're learning this process for the first time. And I know that this was new when we did it last year, but I just want you to know my intent is to continue that ask moving forward.
Great, thank you, Commissioner. And yeah, I mean, before, as been stated, no other affinity groups were doing this. It was just always eat together work, and then Black History Month, Juneteenth, all those things, all the work that everybody preceding us did. I just want to make sure that going forward, that it's not forgotten and that it makes it easier for anybody else coming in this role to be able to do this work without the challenges that the predecessors had to face. Commissioner Ryan?
Yes, thank you, Marvin. Marvin, you made a point about paid time that you are allocated to do this work. And you said 1 hour and then 3 hours for leadership. But what I didn't hear is, was that per week, per month, just so we all know the accuracy of that statement?
Sure, yes, per month.
Okay, thank you. I assume that. And earlier, when we were doing a brief little moment together, you made it really clear that you're sort of all Black employees, not just African-American. And so for the record, what I assumed is that means that you serve African immigrant, people born in Africa, not just African-American. Is that the statement that you were making? And I want to make sure we all catch that.
Correct. That is definitely correct. And I just speak a little bit about that because I don't know if it's just because the acronym rolls off the tongue nicely and it's CAN, City African American Network, but I don't know how to go about making it more inclusive of all Black people, but that's something that we hope to explore in the future. But other things kind of took precedence when that got brought up.
Yeah, so we're not here to pile on. We're not here to pile on your to-do list, but well stated. And then back to just another level setting question, which is it the Department of Human Resources that provides support for all affinity groups? Like, where would that support come from in the city of Portland?
So from my understanding, it goes first through DEEP, and then DEEP has a budgetary
item. Can you spell out DEEP for those two?
Diverse employee.
Okay, this is what happens.
I should know this. I should know this because I sit on the DEEP executive committees, and it's just I'm drawing a blank. Right now. Sorry to all my DEEP people out there. I am blowing it right now. So it goes through DEEP, and then I believe it goes through OEHR after that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Diverse and empowered employees of Portland. Thank you so much for that, Mayor. All right, let's see. Well, I just looked in the participants and I see on there that we did get one of our people to show up, a prior employee. So since they are here, I would love to just go back a little bit and give them the opportunity to share since they did take the time to show up today. Would that be acceptable? Great, okay, cool. So if we wanna give an opportunity here for Miss Lorraine Wilson, who was a previous employee at the City of Portland, and she is one of previous members of the CAN leadership group, which we miss her dearly. There she is. Lorraine, go ahead.
Thanks, Marvin, the other Marvin. Thank you all for this opportunity. It's nice to be invited to chat with you all in support of CAN. You all probably know me, you probably don't. If you don't know me, then that's a problem also. So I just want to say that I was at the city until May this year. I left the city in May of 2021, and I was a member of CAN and CAN leadership. It's nice to hear you all talking about African American and that you're talking about Africans, but I am Afro-Caribbean, okay? So we're talking about the African diaspora on the whole. To give me this opportunity that, as I said, you know me, I've sent you all communications when I left the city. I did an exit interview about my experience at the city, so I don't have to rehash that. If you don't know it, ask one of your staff to find the email so you can, get yourself familiar with my experience at the city of Portland. But what I'm here today to do is to talk about the support of CAN and CAN leadership and what they are doing for Black staff at the city, right? And last year, CAN was very clear in communicating what was needed for Black staff. And what I want to say in support of them is that why has nothing been done? When we come to working on issues specifically about Black people, it seems that the conversation needs to go on and on and on and on and on. And I don't know why that is, because then there are other issues that at the drop of a hat, things happen. And that is my main concern, is that how much longer must this conversation go on before the city responds to some clearly articulated requests from CAN representing the Black staff at the city of Portland? And one of the things that, even though CAN leadership has been advocating on behalf of Black staff, what I understand up until I left is that the culture in support of Black staff has not changed, because the majority of Black staff still don't feel comfortable being part, being visible as part of the CAN leadership to push the agenda. They're quite happy with the people who have stepped forward, but they still don't feel comfortable. And when people don't feel comfortable, it's because they don't feel safe. And therefore, nothing has changed. And that is why I'm saying I'm really happy that they have gotten this opportunity to speak with you all. But I really would like to challenge the council to act and stop talking. Because when you continue to talk, the harm continues. And when they called me to speak today, I was reflecting, and I am like thinking, what would make me want to come back to the city of Portland to work? And I can't answer that question. And until I can answer that question, I think you all have not done enough. And that is what I wanted to see. And I thank you all for the opportunity to come and speak to you and to share with you and to offer this support for my colleagues, who I know is taking a lot of their personal time to push the agenda, because they have no choice. When people are oppressed, we have no choice but to do what we need to do. So that's all I have to say. So I thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for showing up in this space and having, that always having that voice. Like you said, if you don't know me, like you should know me, but thank you for just showing up, because for some people, they're not at a place where they're even willing to show up because they're not sure of what that looks like for them, what the ramifications are for them showing up. So thank you for showing up in this space and sharing your truth and our truth that you shared with us as part of CAN leadership.
Was the formal presentation done?
No. We're
ready to go right back into it.
Yep.
Because we did see your comment around time, so we want to get right back into the presentation and keep on flowing.
So actually, Taisha, if you want to take over.
Absolutely, let's go. If you all are not familiar, Taisha McCool-Riley, I am the mental health program specialist. I am housed in the Office of Community and Civic Life, and I literally service the entire city. There is one of me. And my job is really focused on inward. I don't interface with community. I really focus on how we really acknowledge the prevalence of mental health disabilities in the workplace. How do we create safe, inclusive, and supportive spaces for those who have that experience, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed? And so in my time at the city, there's some things as a clinician, my mind always goes back to, I'm always assessing, right? So that means I'm looking and I'm just gathering information. I'm a sponge. And then I go into the clinician piece where I say, okay, what's my diagnosis? And I think about like, what is the city? The city, like we talk about the report card, and the city is just not performing up to par, okay? And then what is the treatment plan? There's some things that actually need to happen for us to say, for us not to just say centering wellness with the emphasis on mental health is a priority. There's some things that we need to do and build upon. And so there's some things I'm going to take us through that really speak to how we center wellness with an emphasis on mental health. To acknowledge the city employees' humanness, and I will get into that in our next slide, to promote wellness with an emphasis on mental health, right? So we were saying that we want people to be well, but we want them to be not just mentally well, we want them to be holistically well. Why? Because it all is interconnected. It all feeds off of one another. And so when one part of us is lacking, another part of us begins to suffer. And so if we are to think about ourselves as whole, holistic individuals, there are different pieces of us that we need to cater to make sure that our mental is well. To acknowledge the prevalence of mental health disabilities, if we were to really do an honest poll and people felt safe to do so, there would be a lot of us, more than not, who can acknowledge their experience of some type of mental health disability or mental health distress, especially within the last year and a half or so, just to really give you an idea. And so a lot of us show up and we have that experience and no one knows. Why? Because we don't look like what we've been through. We also have to create safe and inclusive spaces for all staff. We have to cultivate safety. It doesn't just happen. People need to feel it. We have to embody it. We have to create it. We have to build upon it. We have to be consistent. We have to be persistent in that work. We can't just say, oh, this is a safe space. I need to feel safe. And if I don't feel safe, you're not going to get all of Taisha. You're going to get a smidge of me because I don't feel comfortable that you will be able to receive all of me in a space. Then we want to promote trauma-informed practices. And a lot of people think like, oh, trauma-informed means we have to be warm and fuzzy. We have to walk on eggshells and tiptoe. And what I'll say is trauma-informed care and practices is not what we do. It's how we do it. It's how we show up and acknowledge the prevalence of trauma and its impacts and understand that it's subjective, that when a person experiences trauma, that experience is very real and true for them, and it has different impacts. And those impacts can be lasting. And so when we show up as professionals, we still bring into that space those experiences and those impacts, right? And so how do we show up in a way that is collaborative, where we're building trust, where we're giving folks choice in things that they do related to their employment and the work that they do. When we are transparent, right? When we are giving people voice and we're validating people, we're empowering them. That's how we are trauma informed. And to embed wellness into our day-to-day policies, practices, and procedures, right? So when we're thinking about, hey, when I show up virtually or when I show up in person, what can I do to improve the quality of a person's experience day to day? Sometimes that means we have a happy light. It's a vitamin D light. It's a happy light, and that helps with your energy. That helps with your mood. Sometimes it's in our check-ins, we actually have a wellness piece. How are you doing? Is there anything you need support with? Are there any resources that would be helpful to you? We build resilience. Right? How do we actually build up people to be able to respond to distress, to endure distress? How do we build people up to actually be able to understand what it is that they're dealing with? And if we think about the Black experience, sometimes that's difficult for us to even acknowledge. Why? Because we have been conditioned to just, suck it up, show up, do what you're supposed to do, then you go home. And if you need to break down there, that's what you do. Promote self-care. Encourage people to take care of themselves. Sometimes that means taking time off. Sometimes that means, hey, you need to go for a walk. You need to breathe. You need to do whatever it is that works for you, that makes you feel good, that makes you feel at ease, that makes you feel like you can take a deep breath. Those are the things we have to be promoting. And we have to prioritize a collective workplace healing. We are in need of healing. We are all walking around wounded as city employees, and we're just bleeding all over the place, so to speak. And there is no one there to help us clean it up. We are just going, and we are steadily being traumatized over and over and over again. But yet we are still expected to show up and to do our best and to put on face and to make everyone else feel like, hey, I love this place. And that's just not some people's reality. With that, we can move into the next slide. And so with that, I like to focus on this. This is the framework from which I work as a clinician and from which I work in my position with the city. A person-centered lens that really acknowledges the humanness of the city employee, right? We are just not the title that's on our business card, that's on our signature and our email. We are actually people. We have feelings. We are deserving of respect and honor and of dignity. We show up made up of many different identities, and that impacts how we see ourselves, how we see others, how we see and interact with the world. It impacts our whole being. And so when we show up as this role, we also show up as all these other identities. When Taisha shows up, she's just not mental health program specialist. She is a Black woman. She's a professional. She is a mother. She is a sister. She is a servant to her community. She's all these things. And so when I show up, my perspective and my experiences impact how I do my job and how I interact with my colleagues. And we are not robots. Like, we have to pause for a cause. We need breaks. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. We need to feel like the city is saying it's okay for you to take care of yourself. It's okay for you to tend to your mental health, because why? We know that if you don't tend to your mental health, it impacts our morale. It impacts productivity. It impacts the culture of the city. And I keep hearing about this, the culture piece of the city. And so if we're looking to shift the culture, there's some things we have to acknowledge about the system that is just not working. And when we're looking at people and we're just saying, hey, you show up, you do this, it doesn't matter what we throw at you, it doesn't matter what you experience here, we are telling people that their human experiences does not matter. And when we go out to community, we're saying, hey, we want community to hear us, but we also make up community as city employees. And so we should be wanting to hear, and as well as hear, we should be wanting to respond and cultivate a space that is safe, inclusive, and comfortable for those who have the experience of any mental health distress, any mental health disability, or who just don't feel safe in their workplace. And so I just zipped through a lot of things, and we will move to the next slide for the sake of time. And I'll pass it over to Jarrell.
Thanks, Taisha. And thank you again to the mayor and the commissioners for your time today. Echoing or continuing in that vein, leading in reality or being Black in 2021, I want to take a moment to begin by acknowledging our truth, reality experiences for Black people and other BIPOC staff. And I'll say this in the same frame of culture. One of my favorite quotes is "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." And in that we can strategize and plan or prioritize all of these things in strategy. But if there's still a problem in culture, then we're not really doing heavy impact or heavy shifting because the culture, I believe, is a heart issue. Personal experience, being Black in 2021, I had someone in upper leadership explain or say to me, "I don't see color." So as a Black male in that space and working for them, to say you don't see color is to say you don't see me. So to say you don't see me then leads to, well, if you don't see me, how can you then acknowledge my experience or what I'm going through, or the trauma or with the deaths or the impact of gun violence in our communities and all of these things that make up or present as my community. So all of this layers into impacting just some of the things that are acknowledged on the slide, which is our reality. So living in fear and experiencing trauma, the vaccine mandate, Ira alluded to it earlier. Some people may feel like it's another form of slavery impacting what our previous experiences are with those sorts of things, managing multiple identities, code switching, or feeling unsafe, or if you can really exert your voice in the space, in the reality of what that is. So all of these things, and we're moving quickly, but all of these things impact what being Black is and our reality of how we show up into our spaces, not just at work, but in our community. Something I do want to highlight as well, I think it was mentioned before, is being city employees, but how that reflects back to our community as well, because there's a certain stigma, I believe, that comes along with that as well, of the work that we're pushing forward within the city, which is why we're so passionate that justice and all of these things are forwarded. And then just the common fact of whenever we push forward work, there's benefits for everyone. There's barriers, as we know, but there's also benefits that apply to everyone within the city and everyone within the community. And so again, I ran through a lot very quickly, but I just wanted to highlight and acknowledge the fact of what our reality is, and that the fact of impact through culture, as well as really being seen in our workspaces. And I'll shift to next slide, which will be taken by Marvin, benefits and barriers.
Right on, thank you, brother. I actually wanna, everybody can read the slide. The slides will be available, but I know we're coming up on the clock and I wanna be able to have a conversation going forward about things that we're gonna do, and I don't wanna miss that opportunity. But I also wanna make sure that I give space and time for my other colleagues to participate. So if we can jump to slide 14, and I will let Layla take over.
Thank you, Marvin. Thanks, y'all. Layla Hale, they, them, the Disability Program Coordinator for the Office of Community and Civic Life. So I think something that's really been driven home as like a common theme throughout all of our work since I joined CAN back in February, March of 2020, is that there's a real disconnect between what accountability looks like and how that separates from punishment. And the city as a whole has a real like carceral mindset of like, oh, if someone messes up, then they have to be punished. And there's no real sense of like what true accountability means and how it differs from punishment. And I apologize, this was a lot more readable when I made this slide. So just to run down real quick, punishment is often a continuation of harm. It doesn't really seek to repair. It's really often like shame-centered. It can be sometimes violence. Someone losing their job, for instance, is not accountability, that's punishment. It also looks like something that's really isolating. It can be passive and reactive. And it's often set by people who are outside the person or group who is immediately affected. So it often looks like, you know, people in positions of authority who are separated from the actual incident or, you know, the place of harm, determining, you know, what happens because of that harm. Punishment is also something that you just have to endure, and it doesn't really address repair at all. It doesn't examine what led us to the harm to begin with, which is a really like, you know, it's a very central part of stopping the cycle of harm. So when we look at accountability, it's a much more, like as Thaisa brought up, it's a much more person-centered approach to addressing all of these ills. It's something that that creates obligation. You know, it's not just, oh, you have to be punished and then we move on because you did your punishment, you did your 40 lashes, whatever. It's something that really requires intentional, consistent, persistent, and insistent investigation into the systems that led us to where we are today. It also has to be something that's voluntary. It has to be consensual, right? If someone is not willing to admit that their practices have been anti-Black in some way, then there's nothing we can do about that, right? We can't force someone into accountability. It has to be a voluntary process. It also has to be something that's determined by the people who are harmed, right? So that's an example of why this person-centered work is so important. Like the reason that our work is effective is because we are leading it, because we are the most affected by these issues at hand. As it was mentioned earlier, like, an outside consulting group could not possibly do this work because they do not have this intimate relationship, and ultimately it doesn't affect them. They can do their contract and leave, right? But we're in this to win this. So we are the best people to determine what next steps are. And I think most importantly, accountability really centers seeking repair. And repair can look like reparation of some sort, right? That can look like so many ways. And I think that a lot of the ways that we are constricted is that we're not allowed to be creative in approaching the nuances of this work. And so that leads back to us having, buy-in from y'all, like support in self-determination in these fields. We can go to the next slide. So common blocks to accountability, and I feel like these are, whether we're talking about anti-Blackness, whether we're talking about ableism, whether we're talking about xenophobia, wherever there's a power dynamic at play, the fragility around directly addressing things, that's what blocks us, right? So we have the criticism of those with power being viewed as threatening or inappropriate or rude, rather than valuable critique. I feel like that's especially pertinent to Black employees. We don't want to be criticized for being uppity, right? Or for pushing against the system or certain power structures. Then energy is spent trying to make sure that people's feelings aren't hurt, and that we do things the right way in the right language with the right step and fetch to be able to work around defensive behavior rather than engaging in direct accountability for the thing, whatever the thing is that we're trying to wrestle with. And so that defensiveness of the current power reinforces that power by protecting it from critique and change. And so when we get to like pertinent next steps, we need to be able to feel like we are, empowered when we say, no, this is the thing that needs to change. This is how it needs to change. And whether or not that hurts somebody's feelings is not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to carry it through and make sure that the work happens. And I think we can go to the next slide. So I really appreciate this quote by Mia Mingus that says basically, what if accountability wasn't rooted in punishment or revenge or superficiality, but rooted in our values, growth, transformation, healing, freedom, and liberation? What if the work of accountability was held so supremely sacred that the people who got to practice it, to truly practice it, were considered lucky, and those who had the honor of supporting and witnessing it were also changed for the better from its power? And really this is saying that like, this is not our standard, like you have to go through HR and go through these levels of punishment, and we have to go through, these 40 lashes of repenting for everything that's happened. It's like, no. And when something goes wrong, that's an opportunity. That's like, yay, something messed up. We get to figure out how to fix it. And that should be a joyful process that we engage in together. And I think we can go to the next slide. All right, that's the end of me. I can pass it off now.
All right, thank you, Layla. Actually, for the sake of time here, and to make sure that we get to some ask and have some dialogue here, everyone has received or should have received at this point in time the workforce report. They should have viewed it. All of our recommendations and asks were included in the workforce report, pages 7 through 10. So at your leisure, please review that. And if you have continued questions about that, you can reach out to us and we can have some follow-up around that. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, 18. All right, hearing the voice of counsel. So far, we provided you with some context and acclimated you to the evolution of CAN's work. We provided some data, both qualitative and quantitative, that tells the story of the experience of Black employees at the City of Portland. We shared some recommendations for systems change and seek partnerships to collaborate and co-create. Now we collaborate on defining accountability and putting it into practice. We also consider considering next steps that include the council. So what could those next steps be? Continue transparent communication, council to CAN, council to council, council to our CAN to Black employees, commitment to quarterly meetings. So initially it was really gung-ho. We got to meet with, like I said, 21, 23 directors. Majority were like in favor of having quarterly meetings. I know that Commissioner Hardesty and Commissioner Maps, we set up ongoing meetings, and you both have honored those, and it's been a pleasure to meet with you quarterly. Recently, the mayor also sent out an opportunity to meet quarterly, so thank you for that, Mayor. So we're hoping that we continue to have these meetings going forward, because we know that this work can't be done in 1 or 2 sessions. This is going to be an ongoing thing. So we're just looking at commitment from those others that have made the idea of meetings going forward happen. And that can look differently. We don't expect, or we don't have the time even to meet with every director quarterly like that. I don't think that's possible, given that's not our job to do that. We would want to develop and implement accountability policy and practices. We want to co-sponsor events and CAN participation. Council impose anti-Blackness policies and guidance. So at this point in time, I guess we can open this up to some questions, because we have about less than 30 minutes now.
First, let me just say thank you, thank you, thank you. It is clear you put a lot of thought and intentionality into your presentation, and you've provided us with a lot of information today, not just today, but prior to today as well. For me, I do have a couple of questions. What I don't know is if Kathy Bliss is here today from Human Resources, because I do want to find out how we can eliminate this data gap and trying to get contact info for Black identified employees so that we can invite them to participate in CAN activities. Is Kathy here? I'm surprised that she's not here. So we will probably have to follow up.
Commissioner Hardesty, just for the record, just so we're all clear, she was not invited to participate today.
Oh,
we requested that HR not be part of today's presentation.
My misunderstanding. I thought that we had her come to answer questions and to work with the council on next steps. I did not know she was not invited because I think that she has a role in this conversation. So that's unfortunate. So anyway, be that as it may, I will follow up, because again, I keep asking that question, and I don't think there's a good reason why affinity groups cannot get emails for folks who self-identify in those affinity groups. We've been working on that for about a year, and I'm kind of tired of asking the same question. So I will figure out another route to get that information. I think it was very telling that out of the 103 responses, there are 8 Black people within the city of Portland who feel supported and feel like they're on a good path towards a positive career. To me, that's mind-boggling information. I also want to say the fact that we went from 793 Black employees prior to the pandemic to now having 456, that is very problematic, and it tells a very stark story. And if I remember from reading your report, there was a significant number of employees that left like within a year's period of time, and there was no analysis to find out why such a large number of Black employees had left the city of Portland. Am I accurate with that, Marvin? He's shaking his head up and down. Okay. I also find it interesting that Black employees are primarily located in PBOT, which I'm assuming is maintenance, and the maintenance of the Portland Bureau of Transportation, and then parks as seasonal employees. I think that tells a story in and of itself about where Black employees are valued within the city of Portland and where they get entryway. When Lorraine spoke earlier, she didn't mention how long she had spent on probation and how many different directors that she worked under before she finally was off probation. But that also seems to be a trend with Black employees at the city of Portland. Many of the issues that you have raised are not policy issues. It is how supervisors and directors and managers see Black employees that are under their supervision, right? There's not a policy solution that I can think of right at the moment that will solve the magnitude of issues that we've discussed. I hope that this is not the last time that CAN will ask for a work session, because I think it's really important that we have a measurement that determines whether or not we are moving the needle at all. What I know today, and I heard the fabulous presentation that Bureau of Human Resources put together, but it did not reflect the knowledge that your survey and reports generated. And so I need to go back and say, well, but what about this? Because I didn't see it in what we were presented in BHR's work session. We have a lot of work to do to eliminate anti-Blackness at the city of Portland. And I want to applaud the courage of city employees who spoke their truth today. And I know under some concern, what's going to happen when you go back to your workplace? What's your supervisor going to say? What happens the next time you need to go to CAN to do some additional research and activity? I want to say here publicly today, if any of you experience any backlash from your supervisors, please reach out to my office immediately, and we will make sure that we stop that immediately, because that is not acceptable for any supervisor to be putting either real pressure or perceived pressure. I mean, I know what happens when somebody goes, what do you mean you're going to be gone to do CAN work? What about, right? So we need to know that as elected leaders, that your workplace is creating barriers for you to come together and do the important work that you do. I'm going to stop. I'll come back later, but I don't want to take up all the time. But again, I want to stop with where I started. The courage that you folks have shown today to be here and present your information is really, really, really humbling. I can tell you, as the first Black woman on Portland City Council, my first couple of months was actually pushing back against people thinking I shouldn't be here. What is she doing here? Why is she asking those questions, right? So I know exactly how you feel, because I feel it every single day in the seat that I'm in, right? So just so you know, it doesn't get easier in this seat than it does in the seat that you're in. But I am grateful that you have the courage to actually come today and work with us to help really fix this, because this is a citywide issue. It is not your problem. It is a city problem. Thank you.
Mayor?
Sorry, I just want to jump in real quick. I just find it, what you said about like, this isn't a policy issue really struck me, because it reminded me of that Walida Imarisha quote that like, social justice is science fiction because we're imagining worlds that have never existed. And I'm like, of course, this doesn't feel like a policy issue, because just the thought of having a policy that institutes like, some sort of accountability for anti-Blackness has literally, like, I can't think of a time that's been done. I don't like, that's science fiction to me. So I think like more of our ask is around like, we need permission and support to dream what that policy might look like. And it might not look like anything, it can't look like anything that is currently in place at the city. So I think, we need the backing as the people who are putting like our faces and like our necks on the line to be like, okay, we have done the work with our people to try and imagine new policy. So we need support in breaking the rules, basically.
Let me be really clear. You got my support 100%. If you come up with a policy that you think will eliminate anti-Blackness at the city of Portland, I'm your commissioner. I'm happy to lead the charge.
well, baby steps. I don't want to promise something that I don't think can happen in my generation, but we just want permission to dream.
I want to make sure everybody else get in there. I don't know who was first. So Mayor, if you want to take over that part.
I'll be happy to jump in. I see my colleagues all have their hands raised, so I'll be really brief. First of all, I just want to acknowledge something that you said today that you said in our prior meetings, and I really want to underscore it. And that is that you're already full-time employees for the city of Portland. You have a lot of work that you're expected to do during the day. I heard you also say quite clearly that this is not work that you should be tasked with doing alone. That we have a role here as a city council, that our bureau directors have a role, that there's a role for the human resources department, for managers, supervisors. We want to share in that work. And so I just want to hear have you hear me say, I acknowledge that and I appreciate that. I also am really interested in what you said about the data. Maybe this isn't as much a question as it is just a helpful, I hope, suggestion. We need to know and work together on what data is the most helpful. And I agree with you. We're good at recruiting, we're not good at retaining. Retaining is really, from my perspective, one of our weaker points. And you discussed a lot of different reasons why Black employees in particular are unhappy with the city of Portland and employment here. And so I really want to focus on that. But I just want to extend an offer to work with you on what is the right information to collect. And clearly during exit interviews, we need to do a better job of collecting information. I did speak to our HR folks after our last meeting. I think they have an interest in working with you as well to help understand what data we should be collecting. Because if we collect the wrong data, we're not going to be able to address the right issues. So I just want to acknowledge that. Could you tell me a little bit more about yours? Well, let me just make one more comment and I have a question. I really appreciate the focus on employee wellness and mental health. This is a very difficult time for our Black employees in particular. And when I talk to our employees, I hear words like fear and traumatized. And it's not just at the employee level, it's also at the home level. And there's a lot to unpack here. And I do believe we can do better as an employer to help our employees get through not just this time we're in now, but whatever the great beyond is as well. So I really look forward to your thoughtful thinking there. I have two quick questions. The first is on this issue of wellness, the word resilience was used a couple of times. Could you dig a little deeper and tell me what actions or vision do you have around resilience? Is that training? Is that the way we supervise? Is it providing better family support? What constitutes resilience and what sort of things did you have in mind?
So what I would say is resilience is not the absence of adversity or struggle or pain or trauma. It's not the absence of that, right? It is the ability to, when you have that experience, your ability to bounce back from that, right? And so when we talk about holistic well-being and we talk about really centering wellness, we have to be creating a space where people actually are equipped. People are educated, right? Knowledge is power. I truly believe that when people know what Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better, right? What we don't know, we don't know. And so when we are educating people, when we are equipping people, when we are building capacity and we are starting people, when we talk about equity and we're talking about let everyone start from have the same starting point, what are we doing as a city to make sure that everyone is starting from that point, right? That everyone has the same information across the board, that everyone has the same understanding, that they're comprehending and filtering a certain type of a way, right? And so when we talk about building resilience, we're talking about it's a people. We're in a people business, right? People's hearts, minds, and their spirits. How are we feeding people's souls? How are we feeding their mind? How are we supporting that? And so when we say build resilience, we're talking about building people up. And part of that is when we talk about the Black experience, my goodness, can we at least be seen see us, as as Jarrell said, see me. When you see me, you definitely see color. Why? Because my Black is beautiful. Sorry, I just had a moment, but my Black is beautiful. So when you see me, you see color, right? Acknowledge that, but build from that. Like, acknowledge that there is oppression, right? That those hard conversations, we need to have the hard conversations. We need to dig deep. We have to get dirty. If you don't get dirty, like, what's the point? If you don't get dirty, what's the point of getting cleaned up? How do you clean up if you're not dirty, right? And so building resilience is just equipping people. You give people what they need to be able to feel like they can push forward. And the thing is, you give them hope. And you can't give them hope if you're not building trust, if you're not maintaining that trust, if you're not giving them buy-in, if they don't feel empowered, if they don't feel like they have choice in certain matters, if they don't feel like their voice is being heard, if we're not teaching people how to cope and giving them strategies and letting them know about what resources are available for them and their family to tend to their wellness. Right now, you can have 10 free sessions per incident through EAP. People don't know that. Why? Because it's not being pushed out. We need to be giving people the information that really feeds into their wellness. Just like we'll come up with, hey, this is going on, come to this community event. Our wellness should be more important than that. We should be pushing wellness like no other, because when we feel well, we show up in a different way. We interact in a different way. And that's how resilience is built, is because when I'm feeling at ease, when I'm not all anxious and triggered and activated, I can rationally think about things. I can use good judgment, right? I'm able to manage my emotions, so I'm not operating from compulsively, right? I'm actually pausing for a cause, and then I'll assess and I'll assert myself and engage, right? So that reactive thing that the city has going on, we can't be reactive. We have to be responsive and we have to be proactive. And building resilience means we act before the trauma actually shows up.
Right on. Thank you for that. Commissioner Hardesty's reminding us that time is short, so I won't ask my last one. I'll just say that for our next meeting, I'd like to dive a little deeper into the seasonal and limited duration employee issue that was raised during the presentation. I thought that was really interesting, and I'd like to take a deeper dive. Thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it.
Can I throw one more bone in around resiliency? Because I feel like it gets a really one-dimensional rap a lot of the time, as like just being like, this is my ability to endure something difficult. But a lot of the resiliency that needs to be built and run the city is around white fragility. And like around like the people's like resiliency around like, oh yes, I did something anti-Black. I have to go and like examine my own prejudices and examine my entire life timeline to like investigate all the anti-Blackness that I absorbed, right? Like there's no resiliency around that. And I feel like that is key. We're not going to get anywhere unless we build up resiliency around acknowledging anti-Blackness, especially like internally. So yeah, I'm not going to take up any more time, but I'm just throwing that bone in.
Hi, I think I'm up next. I know we're short on time, so instead of asking questions, I might make a couple of observations around the presentations that we heard today and outline some homework, I think, for this council, HR, and the rest of the city. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank each and every presenter and CAN in general for the important work they do for the city. On the workforce report, I think that this is a message, I think, to council. It's clearly true that we had a sharp and dramatic drop off in the number of employees, Black employees at the city. The key moment seems to be somewhere between 2017 and 2018. Something major happened there. And I hope and think that this council should dig into what that transition was and see what we can do to make sure that it never happens again. On the CAN employee survey, one of the concerns that got raised was around pay inequities. I've confronted this issue a couple of times in the context of labor discussions, and it is just objectively true that people of color in the city are paid less than their white counterparts. I've dug into this issue a little bit. I don't have a definitive answer, but I believe that the cause of that is fundamentally structural and cultural. I think this council has an obligation to develop a solution to that problem, and I sure hope that we can develop a solution to that problem by the end of the next calendar year, so that we can erase that injustice. The survey also asked and raised, I think, important issues around leadership and workforce culture. And this kind of goes back to an earlier discussion about what's policy and what's culture. And it is, many of the concerns that came up here struck me as being about culture. And it's kind of hard to figure out how to translate the need for culture change into concrete policies. I think that was a discussion that got echoed here. But I sure hope that we can have a dialogue between this council, CAN, and HR about how we can translate specifically, I think, some of the ideas and suggestions we saw on the slides on centering mental health and personal centered lenses into real policies and real budgets, so we can begin to make that cultural change. I also want to say I was awfully excited to hear some of those ideas around accountability practices. I think that's exactly right. I'd like to use what might traditionally be thought of as opportunities to punish people as learning opportunities to actually promote learning. This council has actually explored that in some policy areas, and I'd love to take some of the innovative work that we've done there and expand it into new spaces. And finally, and this message is probably for council and city staff, in my observations and interactions with CAN, there have been some just data needs which are pretty straightforward. And I think we should have done better on. Commissioner Hardesty's mentioned one. It is frustrating and disappointing that we can't muster something as simple as coming up with a list of the Black employees who work for the city. I hope that we can fix that. And I'm also aware that CAN had to struggle for an awfully long time. I know a lot of us on this council advocated to get funding for CAN this fiscal year, and I was disappointed to hear that because of essentially some bureaucratic confusion, CAN had difficulty actually accessing those funds. That strikes me as being a management failure on the city's part, and I hope that moving forward we can do better. So those are some of the lessons I've learned. Those are some of the ideas I'm excited about moving forward on. And I want to thank everyone for their presentation today. And we're getting short on time, so I will just lower my hand and hand the mic off to my colleagues.
Thanks. I think I was next, and I just want a chance just to briefly reflect on what I heard today. A lot of it's been said, but I just want to thank CAN leadership again, including Marvin, Taisha, Ira, Layla, Jarrell, and Lorraine. Anyone else I missed, I want to just appreciate your time and your expertise and your experience that you've shared with us today. It's still remarkable to me that this work has been led by 6 of you. That's really incredible. It's clear that for too long that Black employees have been burdened with expending their time and energy and expertise to advance the city's values. And I deeply appreciate and recognize these efforts. At the same time, it's worth restating again what we've heard today, that this should not be the work of employees solely to do constantly, to lift up these issues and remind the city what we have said ourselves about our values. It's the work of us to listen, to learn, to collaborate, and to create that environment that supports Black employees, and to collaborate with CAN to take faster action towards the systemic change and support and employee wellness. And specifically to some of the needs that you expressed and some of the issues that you expressed regarding data and access, I'm very committed to, it's been said already many times, to getting and looking at and using data effectively to not only drive the stepped up support that we need to address all the issues, recruitment, retention, leadership, promotion, strategies, everything you've outlined, and wellness, but also so that Black employees know about CAN and have the space to participate and engage. I'm also very interested in looking at the time that you're allocated to engage. That matters to me. So that our workforce retains and values your expertise, and that we have critical mass of employees who look and reflect the Portland of today. Because this is what gives us credibility in our work in the community and makes us a better, more responsive agency and more equitable as well. The other issues I heard that you expressed support, recognition, and wellness, and the space for this work. And to me, this gets at the heart of what we're talking about when we talked about culture of the city and how we do business. Because from what I heard, the system was what drives the culture here. And several things I learned today that speak to this that I think are really worth stating are notable, or restating are notable to me, about the 8 out of the 103, that only 8 out of 103 that felt supported in their role, with the numbers decreasing over time. Also that the experiences vary vastly by bureau and position. And also that there's deep overrepresentation and underrepresentation depending on what leadership level or what position you have in the city. That's been an ongoing issue, and it's something we need to take measurable steps at now. And also this important information was, again, the result of just a small work group that made such a difference by bringing this forward. Imagine if we had the full capacity of the city working together alongside you to address and take actual real steps on this. Imagine that. So these things all signal the deep need for systemic approach instead of the uneven one that it seems has been happening. It seems like, and maybe I'm wrong, and I would love to look more at the data, but depending on, there were different percentages of different satisfaction level or dissatisfaction level. And that may or may not speak to the unevenness of, application of strategies and support varying by bureau, perhaps, and numbers of, representative leadership in those bureaus as well. So it matters for our long-term effectiveness, both internally and externally. And obviously I'm not the expert, but we have a lot of expertise here and long history and wisdom here. And like Layla said, you said something about, we need to welcome that accountability. We can't be afraid of it. We need it. We need it to know where we're going. We need it to recognize where the fragility exists and to dive into that and explore it, because that's the only way we're going to move through it. And to not resist, the need for behavior and systems change, because then we are truly part of the problem. We're in our own way, and we're not being true to what we're saying. So anyway, all that to say is that I am very interested in seeing this work move forward. Having a city where every employee, Black employees, feel the ability to bring their full selves to work, and that their work is valued and that and heard and implemented, and that people want to work here and come to work here because they know that these things will move forward, is important to me, and it should be important to us as a city and as a council. So very interested working with colleagues and with CAN on these things going forward. And I'm also very interested in looking at timetables as well to see this work turn into action. Thanks again for the presentation, everyone.
Yes, I want to start off by saying I want to thank you for being so conversational. It was very good, authentic dialogue. It wasn't as, I'll say, pre-programmed as some sessions. So I really appreciate that. Since we met in May, I haven't had a chance to dive into the most recent survey, and that was very compelling to hear what you had to say about that. A lot of what I think we experienced today was moving out of any sort of denial to acceptance. You have to accept that basically we got a really bad grade, only 8, so 7.5% we had some sort of satisfaction. So you got to move to improve. And also the other big, are you kidding me, was 42% drop in the number of African-American Black employees at the city of Portland in 2 years' time. That's a big wow. We should look at comparisons to other affinity groups. I doubt that there's going to be anything similar to that, but it would be great to see that. I want to acknowledge having Lorraine here to say what would it make what would make one come back? And the fact that she couldn't answer that question was very compelling. I'd like that we have conversations about policy, about culture. I agree, it eats it for breakfast and lunch, and so does practice. So policy doesn't always land. And so that's what we're really talking about today, getting out of denial that the proclamations and policies actually land anywhere. They often don't. And so I think getting that truth out was very important today. We clearly have an access to data challenge. I've heard this from other affinity groups as well. So what is going on with that failed system? And I will just end with how important it is to focus on when I do work around equity, looking at disparities and where the most extreme disparities are is so important to focus on, because it always improves the practices and culture for the rest of the city. So I think it's really smart strategically. I'm sure that was not a good word to use, but anyway, it's important to focus on where we're seeing the biggest disparities. And so this was a very great session. I know we're out of time. I just wanted to thank you, and I look forward to meeting with all of you soon, our office. Thanks.
I know we are over, but Mayor, if I could just say a couple of quick things before we leave.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, everyone, for being here today. I just want to be very specific. I think we need to continue to work on how the data that you have gathered through your surveys will inform the work of human resources. I don't expect you to turn over your work to them, and I don't expect them to be the experts on your work. So the question is, we have to figure out how that will work so that you are partners in helping human resources be better, but I certainly don't expect you to do it for them. So that's one. Two, again, I'm committed to an additional 50,000 because annually to support your work, because I do believe that CAN is asked to do things for the city on behalf of the city of Portland, and are not actually compensated or hasn't been compensated prior to last year's budget process. The third thing that I wanted to say is we need your help, as gun violence and houselessness are the two top issues that we are dealing with at the city of Portland. And each of you have lived experiences that could inform us and how we continue to move that work forward, both because of your work with the city of Portland and your work out in the broader community. Please engage with us around that issue, because just like with resolving these issues for Black employees, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. And I'm really interested in what CAN believes would be helpful in reducing community violence and helping with our houseless crisis. And I will stop there. And I just want to say again, the courage that you've shown today, being here and speaking as openly and honestly as you have, is greatly appreciated. And I thank each and every one of you, as well as my colleagues, for really being engaged in this really, really important conversation. I will end by saying we need to do this a year from now to make sure they're making progress. Without check-ins, without a timeline, we will continue to have this conversation for the next generation. I'm old. I don't have time for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. We appreciate the platform we were given. Thank you for this opportunity. And we do look forward to continuing the work, because obviously the time just flew by and we still have so much that we want to be able to share.
I knew it would. That's why I was pushing you guys. Hey, we only got 45 minutes. Hey, we only got 30 minutes.
Yeah, we totally miscalculated like how much time. We were like, but no, I think what needed to be said, what needed to be shared was shared. And for Commissioner Ryan, these are matters of our heart. And so yes, when we speak, you hear the passion, you can feel the passion, because we are speaking about us.
Thank you, everybody. Great presentation. Colleagues, we are adjourned. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.